And so we are very excited today to have Frank Neatpold and others who have been working with him on developing an ACE national strategy in the United States. And I think most of you are familiar with ACE, the Action for Climate Empowerment, which is the rebranded Article 6 of the original UNFCCC. The convention required that nations develop education, public engagement, and related efforts for training and so forth. But very few countries have actually done that. And the United States is now taking a very proactive planning process. And Frank, I'll turn it over to you now.
Mark, it is wonderful to be with you all today, and I'm really happy to be where we are in this process. So let me share my screen. Can you guys all see this?
Yes.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. I've got it on the wrong screen, so sorry. I'm going to be looking over here, but the slides are going to be where you guys are going to be talking. So today, Deb Morrison from the University of Washington in the United States, but also in Canada. You've got a little blurriness on you, Deb. I think you like being blurry. And then Jen Kretzer from the Wild Center in New York, upstate New York, are joining me in this presentation. So it's a great pleasure to be with you all today. We have a lot of progress to report on, and hopefully some of these lessons and work that we're doing here, but a lot of the things that we did to get this going came out of the ECOS community. So there's a full circle aspect to this presentation. So let's just jump in. There we go. So just a couple things, and Jen and Deb, anytime you want to jump in, jump in. Then we're going to have a very freestyle. I don't need to give you permission, but but I'm going to. So we're a fun group. We get a lot done. So just a couple things that reaffirming why ACE matters for the work we're doing, especially within our national circumstance, but in general in climate action, we've unearthed some important findings. Why you need a strategy and why you need a coalition, and then also how specifically how can ACE support a national climate action, and then the ACE national strategy is how specifically can it advance ambitious climate action in the United States? But that United States is just our practice. It's not unique to our instance. So just to give you guys a little bit of context, obviously the administration has switched, and I've added this executive order from January 27th because it's the one that is the second executive order about us coming back into the Paris Agreement, but this one has the details. The first one just says we're in. That happened on January 20th. The second one actually is has tons of details, but it also calls out specifically that we are building a nationally determined contribution in the United States right now, and we expect to have that done by Earth Day. Or before Earth Day. So it's a very ambitious schedule for us. And I know the international community is trying to get ACE into the NDC. Our process got some language that may be influenced how the NDC is built. We'll see. It's all about engagement. So just from a big broad perspective, we've been participating, a lot of us, in this whole process, the international process, the momentum for change and the ACE dialogues and the international and the regional. And then obviously we came back into the Paris Agreement in January. Here we are in early March, and we have our eyes on the COP process. So we think that how the U.S. joins the international community at the COP process related to ACE is very important. It's not that far away from now. You don't need this, but this actually, for the one thing that I think is important, and maybe Jen and Deb, if you can build on this, is, in the United States, there's an amazing amount of ACE related activities. People who are doing ACE, but they don't use the word ACE. And so one of the processes we have to do is to translate and curate and kind of invite people into this international architecture. But really, one thing we've affirmed is that ACE, all the dimensions of ACE, is an incredibly powerful structure when you do all of it together. And I think we're going to get a little bit of that here, but it is not a natural thing.
I'll add in here, Frank.
Go for it.
So one of the things that's been really interesting is, I don't know how many of you have seen the brief that Alexandra Caprini put out for, and colleagues put out in for the Netherlands, I believe it was, Climate Envoy. And they really started questioning, like, what is empowerment? And I think that's really helpful to think about as we look at the different 6 ACE elements. Like, what aspect of this type of activity helps empower climate action? That's really what we want to get at with ACE. Yep. And so we really want to think about, how do we weave in justice and equity into how and who is empowered and where and to do what? And so each of these areas, we think broadly about them as a collection of different ways we organize learning to accelerate climate action. And they're kind of siloed in this way historically, but how do we actually make them much more intersectional?
Yep.
Can I? Yeah, I just had one other thing to add. You know, oftentimes I think in this in the U.S. when you use climate and education in the same sentence, everyone immediately goes to K-12 schools, and that's what they focus on. And they focus on the work at the Department of Education at a national level and like at the state level. And so one of the things that we've been really trying to do in multiple coalitions that are like gelling and building right now is to really socialize the concept of ACE as a framing, and that all, like, it's not just K-12, obviously, and I know all of you here on this call know that, but like in a much broader space, that we need all of these things operating in a constellation of partners in communities, in cities, in states, and in, you know, as a country, internationally, to move this forward. So
I hope you're starting to feeling some of the key aspects that were just said, and we'll continue to reaffirm that as we get into the details. But, you know, I don't think we're going to do this the way we used it in the presentation. But one thing I like about this graphic that we created, Deb, did you create this graphic?
Yeah.
Yeah,
right?
She did.
So
Rockstar graphic.
Well, what's really important from when I look at this graphic is that point that Jen just made is a lot of times ACE has been relegated to education, and sometimes just K-12 education. Education is a massive enterprise of activities and forms. K-12 is just one form, and they're very interoperating when you look at learning across. But unfortunately, that's not been the way it is considered in a lot of the policy conversations. So we're really looking at the full totality of ACE, and then looking at who is doing this work where you are transitioning from education to public awareness and public participation. And we're going to give you a case study of that a little later in this presentation that kind of gives you an example. But this work is definitely true ACE, full ACE, all ACE, not just one piece of this. And that's just something that we have found and reaffirmed by practice as a crucial piece of this work.
And the other thing that this diagram does, that the tables in the ACE guidelines from the UN or the UNESCO offices, the UNFCCC or the UNESCO offices hasn't really done, is it puts the goal of the effort in the middle.
Right.
So the idea that we're actually trying to get to accelerate just climate action, and it names justice in a way that actually isn't found clearly in any of the documents. I've been scouring them in the last few months in detail, and we want to actually bring in UNDRIP, we want to bring in the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People and the UN Human Rights Declaration and the new work on harmony with nature that's about rights of nature. Like, we really want to bring that into play in ACE, and so it really does need to be an intersectional effort.
Yep, awesome. One thing that we found at the beginning of this work was that We knew that in the United States that ambitious climate action was a possibility in November of 2020, and then really getting going in January of 21. So we did a lot of landscape work, and really, you know, through a series of meetings and workshops and discussions and coalition building activities, started really looking at it. But the ACE work, actually, it was Tim Damon who, you know, Mark, you just named as the interim focal point in your replacement, challenged us in 2019 to really look at the ACE national strategy as a powerful tool for the United States. And so we took that seriously and began a process. And when you start using the ACE lens on the work of a nation, across a nation, you start seeing depth, but it's not aligned yet. And so that's where the national strategy became a really important tool that a lot of us have gelled around as a critical piece of work that would make a transformational difference in our work to support and accelerate climate action. And you can see some of the list of things, but what's in my practice, and I don't know, Deb and Jen, if you've had this, is these things tended not to work together over the last decades. They tend to be their own thing. What ACE does, especially the national strategy piece, says they work well if you put them together intentionally, and in that intentionality, there's different work that must be done, and that's really what this is about. Jen and Deb, does that resonate with you?
Absolutely. And really thinking about like what it is we can learn in all directions from the system, because historically we've often thought about learning moving in particular pathways, like it moves from scientists to communities and things like that. And we're actually saying, no, there's lots of different kinds of learning. For instance, scientists might need to learn more about justice and environmental justice histories in place.
And so one thing that we found to kind of get ready for this is what's missing. So we've got a lot of great pieces, but our work isn't sustained, it isn't strategic, and it isn't scaled. And so that's why we thought that convening a community around addressing how do we get to sustain strategic scaled work was really our call to action of why we came together. And I thought that was important for anybody in the world, but specifically for our work in a large, complicated country with a large population, and there's lots of cultural issues and economic issues and injustice issues, that this is really a crucial step for us. So just to kind of what we found is that ACE is crucial, essential, central to accelerating just climate action. That is a powerful statement, and just to let that sit in. And a lot of it, this is what we've found in this journey we've done together. But I got to say that we learned when we were participating in those dialogues, specifically me, when I was participating, I was watching the way other countries used ACE and the ACE national strategy as a powerful tool to address that last slide, what's missing. And so these bullets just describe some of the considerations that are important for our work in our national circumstance. Jen or Deb, you have anything you want to build on that? All right, keep on going. Let's go. Let's get into it. So what do? We built a coalition. And what's, I think, and I'd be interested to hear, Jen and Deb, your perspective on this, but you can't get everybody involved in the process, but we designed a community-driven process that was very representative to the best of our ability. And and this is the documentation of some of that. But one of the things is we started listening and dialoguing about what would an ACE strategy be? What could it be? What would be important to consider, and how would we organize it? We were very intentional about getting as many perspectives represented in that process so that it would resonate. And if you went with another 2,000 people, you wouldn't really hear very different things. If you added 10,000 more people to this process, you wouldn't really hear very different things. But you want to have enough diversity of perspectives and considerations that it really, nothing new, really new is coming in. And so some of these circles represent those perspectives. Does that feel right, Deb and Jen, to you?
Yeah, I would say too that the idea of this work is built on this deeper idea of a network of networks, right? So we are constantly expanding existing networks and building relationships, not for the one-off effort of the creation of a plan, but for the long-term effort and continued work to transform our world, to like shift into just climate action.
Yep.
And so this planning process is part of what will help us hopefully cross new boundaries into new communities, share much more broadly with each other, and build a much more robust and just future together. So it's not solely about the plan. The plan is a mechanism for a mobilization impetus for doing this.
Yep. Yep. Jen, anything you want to add there?
Just that we're built, you know, this is really about building and expanding the stage, the umbrella, sharing the mic, like opening up this broad-based coalition. So it is a much more inclusive and participatory process in a way that has not been done. And as Frank had said earlier, there are so many really great resources in the US, but they're and that are happening, and ACE is happening on the ground in so many ways. But they haven't been aligned, and without that alignment, we can't leverage the collective action that we need to make a just transition.
You know, and Jen, I think it was you that brought forth the idea of lower the logos in the process, because, you know, I would imagine anybody on this call has been in lots of multi-program, multi-organizational meetings about collaboration. And one of the challenges in that is that if the shared mission is crucial to what new thing can we do together, as opposed to let's just do that thing that you developed over there. And that was a really important process, finding that allowed us to imagine something new together, as opposed to let's just get behind somebody's great work. And that usually closes down possibilities. And that was something that I think we successfully did, but it was really important to do it that way, to get a new vision. So this is a process diagram of what we did. Because I think hopefully maybe reinforce this point, we went with a community first model, really deep community engagement about what would the community want ACE to be from people who are involved in ACE or involved in climate action. And so we designed processes, dialogues, and then we synthesized those. And from that, we generated a framework. And Deb Morrison on the call here was one of the authors of that framework. Here's an example of that. Here's the book version as opposed to the framework itself. We'll get into that in a second, but it was we honored the contributions that people put forth. We didn't edit them, we didn't change them, we assembled them. But there was also strategic review and community review to get to an end product that really is the framework that is going to lead to where we're going next.
And I think one of the things in that process that is really important to understand is it's really different than some of the other planning work that has been done, I think, at the national level, because we weren't looking for a consensus report. We're intentionally trying to hold disparate voices together in the space in a way that still could make sense of them and think about them as recommendations going forward, and what the community might want to work out and like think through in different contexts. And the idea that we're actually not trying to find a singular solution. We're trying to find the plethora of solutions that work in different contexts for different communities, and to try and map that out.
Yep.
One other thing, Frank, about the book versus the policy document. So The book that was written at the same time as the policy document. That was a exercise in creative writing efforts. And so inside this book is the policy document. It's one of the chapters in here. And then in response to it, we were able to actually have several of the strategic reviewers write their own word responses and include them in this. And then Tom Bowman and I wrote a couple chapters that helped illuminate some issues that arose during the strategic review, that we didn't want to alter the original document, we didn't want to alter the original document, but we wanted to add some richness and some depth to the work. So the book actually has chapters like that. So for instance, it has a chapter on rural communities, unpacking what is rural, so that we don't actually just default to white America, but that we actually think more complex about that. And then also, yeah, there's some commentaries listed there. And some key terms, some definitions of key terms and assumptions. So it helped to kind of give some big, broader context.
Absolutely. And so, you know, I think just coming back to here, so the result is a framework, and we timed this so that we were ready November 30th of 2020, because we knew the possibility of whatever happened in the election, that the accelerator was about to hit if the nation decided one way, and it did. So we were well timed, but I think that Taylor Morton's, this is from her commentary about this idea of gathering all these different disparate perspectives to put equity and justice at the center of decision-making on climate, economy, education, COVID-19 responses, and other interests. You know, that's new. That's really new for this community, but it is deeply important that it is there. And I think that, you know, Taylor's perspective there, what I think is really crucial. The link to the URL is where you can get this is there. But, you know, and if you, I'm actually feeling like, you know, we need to kind of get to the conversation sooner. Jen, are you okay if we don't do the case study? Just feels like
Sure.
People may not want to.
I just want to make sure that everyone knows I put the link to both the ACE website as well as the where you can find the book. But on the website, there is a policy brief, there is a 5-page executive summary, and then there's the longer full roadmap. So you can download it, you can look at, you know, the convenings themselves, but so that's where all the resources are, and there's a way to sign up. So we'd love to have you on our list. We have folks from all over the place, and it's growing every day.
Yep. So, you know, this is the kind of the segue to the conversation is this is a roadmap. We built it as a roadmap, and the agencies, specifically the one I'm in, NOAA, is advancing this as a high priority for implementing the Paris Agreement, both resourcing and staffing. We're growing the community of people that would be involved in the development of the strategy, but also Deb's point about the community who would be the deepest part of ACE is actually outside of a government. It's in the universities, the schools, the museums, the cultural sector, the parks, the libraries, there's so much richness of the community out there that is doing important work here. That the center of the work is actually outside of the government. But we play a key role. And so we're trying to define all of those things and actually co-develop a national strategy rapidly, but also I think iteratively. I don't see this as being we've got a strategy, now we're good. It's gonna be an iterative strategy because it's a dynamic field. That's just maybe a fast way of talking through these items. Anything else you guys want to add on that point?
Yeah, a couple other pieces of work that have gone on. I'll stick them in the chat window here. Kudos to the whole team, like who has been working on this. And so a couple key articles that have been written that are either currently in press, like imminently coming out. So there's 2 that have been accepted and are either in press or like literally like on fire, hot off the presses. So one in Environmental Research Letters. I think I've sent the link to the final version. It's like the edited version, but you can get at it there. And then the article that, so that first one was led by Tom Bowman. The second one was led by Sati Sintron, Haley Krim, and myself. And it was around the process. So those of you who are interested in understanding the process that we engaged in, that latter one will be out anytime. It's part of the special issue for COP26. It got accepted into the Journal of Science Policy Governance and Governance. So we're super excited about those efforts because they allow us to get some more detail on the process into play this year. So we're very thankful for those journals for their rapidity in getting things done. Those two articles were also written at the same time as the book and the process. So there was a lot of writing going on in the fall to get this all in place. So really fabulous.
So, you know, we've already put the link to, if you want to be a signatory, the book, I think Jen, you already put the link to the book if this is helpful for you. One thing that I did want to call out was Christina Kwok, who's sometimes a member of this community. I don't know if you're on today, Christina, maybe you are. I'm paying attention to what we're saying, not who's here in the chat. But this just came out a couple of days ago, and it's got some really interesting recommendations, very US centric. But you know, there's a lot of, if anybody wants to have a conversation about like how you actually construct a complicated government approach with a complicated community approach to ACE at a national level, that's what we're in the middle of. And so there's a lot of details that are important here. So I just want to make sure that if that ever comes up as a question, we're open to having that, because we're learning it as we go, but we're documenting part of it through this writing of how this is working. And we've got a lot of people involved in this process. So we were going to do a case study, but given we're at 32 minutes into the talk, I think probably people would want to move to conversations. Is that how you want to transition, Jen and Deb? Or should we?
Yeah, no, I think that a lot of folks here have heard about the work at the Wild Center. I'll just say one thing, that I think one of the things we found to be helpful for folks that are just learning about ACE is understanding how it can be operationalized and what it looks like on the ground. Yep. And so in other presentations that we've done to sort of build support and capacity, we've provided some case studies that can sort of illustrate what it looks like so people can see themselves in the work, because as Frank and Deb said earlier, so many community-based organizations, cultural institutions, and others are doing ACE. They just don't call it that. Right. So helping people again to expand that, to think about how they can use that frame and where in their orgs or institutions those different pieces of building public awareness, access to information, network coordination can be connected, like where is that connective tissue, and then how it connects to the larger work that's happening and at scale. So that's, I think, all we need to say. You can skip those
Sure.
Slides, Frank.
Sure. So, these are examples of all the different ways that the Wild Center is advancing ACE. We see this as an incredibly positive, disruptive tool for change. And so it's been a long slog, but we still got some more to go. We're not officially launching an ACE national strategy yet. The decision is pending. It could be any day now. It's currently in John Kerry's office, but we're making progress here. But we definitely have our eye on COP26 and beyond. Probably that line needs to go beyond that orange circle there, Deb, given what you said. So anyway, we'll just leave it here, but please explore our work. If you find it interesting, we'd love to collaborate and learn from everyone else. We were deeply inspired by other countries' work, but right now, as far as I know, we might be the 7th country working on an ACE national strategy. But it's one thing I'll definitely say from my perspective is it is an incredibly powerful tool. And I don't understand why other countries aren't using this tool to its full, and I would love to collaborate more, because the more we do it, the more we learn and the better we all are as a field in the community, which is really the 6th element of ACE anyway, that international collaboration. I see the need for more collaboration on national strategy work, it is transformational. And it is crucial to accelerating climate action. I mean, and we haven't even gotten into the strategy part. This is why we're going to go into the strategy part. So that's just my closing perspective. Deb or Jen, do you have any other thoughts?
I'm curious of what questions folks have as we start to chat about this, because we can go in a number of different directions. So yeah, I'm
Sure.
curious to hear people's questions.
Yep. Jen, you cool? Let's do it. All right, so I'm gonna stop sharing. And then we can just move to, so we can actually see each other. So the floor is open.
Questions? James, I like that your hands went up the whole time. Do you have a question?
Yeah, I noticed that too. And I was like, we'll just, and here we are. Jim.
I'm just waving with approval. I'm just waving with approval. Sorry.
Awesome.
I should haven't taken it down.
It's okay. Well, what can we do to be helpful? And Tim, thank you for being with us. You know, you did kick us into gear. So deep gratitude to that. So thank you. Abby?
Hey there, good morning.
Hey, Abby.
Good morning.
Great to see
Hi,
everyone.
Abby.
Hey. Well, this is fabulous, and what a brilliant strategy to do the book and articles to align in a strategic and timed way with COP26 and the Biden administration. So it's just, you know, hats off and kudos to all of you for that, you know, just brilliant and rockin' leadership on this. My question has to do with the sort of research agenda around this and how this interweaves with what MEIS is doing and their international strategy to monitor and bring evidence and the rest to this sort of international blooming of this work. And then the other initiative was this Coalition for Climate Education. And so there seems to be some overlap between these realms. I'm just curious where that is at this juncture.
I can lean into that one.
Yeah.
So a couple things. We are keeping in conversation with MEIS as these things unfold in a number of different ways. And really thinking about, I actually just edited an op-ed this morning about the US-Canadian climate meeting and thinking about how to coordinate that more effectively across the two countries. And there is also efforts with the Climate Change Education Coalition that has been formed around Joe Henderson, Don Haas, Casey Birch, that's involved researchers from Canada and the US and to think together. So like in the North American context, things are actually getting very coordinated. Like Marcia is an advisor on that project, and Christina was involved in it, and Ellen Field from Canada, and then Ellen Field's been involved in conversations with the ACE Focal Point within Canada. So like all of those things are knitting together really well. It's taking a lot of time and a lot of relationship building and conversations, but I think it is actually moving in that direction. For instance, I have a presentation I'm doing for the Council of State Science Supervisors to think about like coordinating some of this work on climate justice across all the states. And Sarah Stapleton, who's done some work in Oregon, who's really climate justice focused, and Tim Swinehart from the Rethinking Schools are coming into that conversation. So really trying to knit some of those different communities who've been working in different ways, but knit them together is really the goal. In terms of international level research and collaboration, I think that is starting to happen more, like being able to talk to Alessandro Caprini and the work that they are doing in the Netherlands. He's actually Italian, but like the work in the Netherlands that he's involved in has been really helpful. And I'm writing a brief back to him. It was supposed to be a brief. It turned into a 20-page paper 2 weeks ago, and I'm trying to get it back to a brief. That is like back to him about like how justice weaves into the work that they've done and make it more explicit. So that kind of move. And I think trying to figure out how to coordinate that is literally one of the arms of the ACE work, like how to weave that in strategically as part of the ACE plan. And I have some thoughts about that, but of course I'm one of the plethora of researchers working in the space. So yeah, it'll be really interesting, Abby, to see how that really unfolds and how to make it coherent in the research community. Yeah.
So Abby, one other piece that builds on what Deb just said is that what we heard from the ACE dialogue process was there is need for infrastructure, human infrastructure, and network building and not working. Got you, Deb. And sorry about the dogs, but there are other investments that make what we are now experiencing, where we have a whole new coalition of climate change education policy coalition, and then we have a climate change education research coalition, and we have, these are the explosion of activity inside the United States right now is significant. But if we don't invest in backbone infrastructure, coordination, architectures, network building, network of network building, the potential will not be realized. And naming it allows us to resource it. And gathering and focusing resources for good, as opposed to just, they dissipate very quickly if you don't have a purpose aligned to them. And we're more the former than the latter. So that's definitely there. Jen, you had something else to build?
Yeah, just to say, there's so many groups that are trying to come together to work on this. So there's a research collaborative that Deb mentioned. There's also, actually directly following this call today,
Yep.
A climate change education policy coalition that's forming. That's again national, with leads from some of the larger like National Wildlife Federation, Association for Science and Technology Centers, North American Association for Environmental, among others, that are coming together to look at policy like across the board, and where this group can have like consistent, clear messaging to advance policy and help leverage funding in the whole of government approach that Administrator McCarthy is taking, and looking at all those spaces that provide funding support, for instance, and looking at those agencies and how we can help advance that climate education broadly as it applies to ACE can be applied to all of that. We've also recently connected with the We Are Still In / now called America Is Still In group. We did a presentation earlier this week. We're hoping to continue those conversations and look at ways again where we can pull together and find ways to lower our logos, work together for collective action, and accelerate and empower the work.
So Laura, I see your hand is up.
Yes, I have two statements to make. First of all, my dear friend is a cultural attaché for South America in the State Department. And her job right now is to come up with a way to deliver climate change education to South America,
Wow.
to build a network in South America. So the State Department is working on that. The second point is, I'm a community educator, and there's no really professional group on climate change for me to join. This is the closest one I've found that isn't concentrated on K-12 education, but maybe gives me a framework for what belongs to climate change education. So I would like to see more opportunity for community education to have a place in the professional organizations.
I heard you loud and clear. I'd love to follow up with you, Laura, on the first item. And second item is this is going to grow. If we build and support network building, and we're going to find community education is a relatively new form for a lot of us. And so that is emerging, but it is also crucial form of education. Yeah, agreed. We have to build the backbones though.
Yeah, and Laura, the other thing about that is that there has been, there's an increasing amount of work, I would say, in science communities, like scientist-led kind of organizations, to think about justice inside their organizations. They haven't necessarily intersected that with climate. So like, because yeah, just leave it at that, no explanation. So they've just, so things like sea change inside AAAS and other efforts that I've seen in AGU. And so those are really great efforts to be able to further the way that scientists are even able to collaborate around justice issues, because they're starting to actually think in different ways and organize in different ways. But there have been some leaders in the scientific field, folks like Heidi Stelter, who was one of the IPCC Cryosphere authors, who have done like amazing work in the scientific community around justice community-centered collaborations that really have community voice leading the effort and scientists like supporting. And that has been amazing. Also the Quinault effort out with the NOAA out in the west coast of Washington State, like really some great examples. But what we need to do and what ACE can do, the power of ACE, is it can lift those types of collaborations and why they're effective into the broader conversation, so that we can as a broader community learn from that and then like reproduce not the exact thing, but the type of collaborative enterprise. So, and that's what we really want to see. So.
Well,
oh, I'm sorry, Laura.
with you talking about science, it brings me back to one of the problems I have with community education. The people aren't going to care that much about science.
Mm-hmm.
It's too much to have to learn. And what I see in the resources that are available, it's a lot of science-based resources, but it's not, those aren't applicable to my situation, because people aren't going to put the effort into thinking about it. Plus I have one-shot time to reach the people. And
yeah, we have to do better about creating resources, and that's part of the component of what's called infrastructuring. Like there's too big of a gap right now between scientific resources that are produced around climate change and what communities actually need to use and engage in action. So we need to close that gap, and then we do that through collaborative efforts in communities. So
Laura, one thing I would ask is that you participate in the co-development of an ACE national strategy, because what you're naming must be brought into the process if we're going to make progress on them. So that the more we participate in the process, the more likely the plan will actually address the needs and resources to make progress. So like, that's why a collaborative process, deeply co-developed with the community and the practitioners and the government, is a much better model in our estimate. Maybe this is the way other countries are doing it, but there aren't that many versions for us to look at. So we're kind of whole cloth making it as we go, but definitely inviting everyone to participate is a key element to ensure that what we come up with is actually what is needed. So Mark, you had your hand up?
Yeah, thank you. This is exciting and long overdue in many ways. You know, I was just reflecting back on an experience that I had at a conference in Rome back in 2011, where I was sitting at the table with a number of people from different parts of the world. I was actually at a table with a bunch of Germans, and when they found out I was from the United States, they turned their chairs to my back. In other words, they turned away from me, because in many international circles, there's basically an attitude that the United States is arrogant and telling everybody else what they should do, but they can't get their act together themselves. So I mean, my impression is that you're definitely getting your act together. And there's so much that the world can benefit, because there's been this incredible research that's gone on about effective ways of engaging people. You know, it's not just about giving them information, teaching them about the science. You've got to bring in a whole dimension on how they can be active. And we, you know, over the past decade in particular, the US has been really the leader in developing this kind of research body. So to me, there's a dilemma here, and I'm wondering if you all have given any thought to this. because it's more than just a research body that you can hand off to other people. It's a matter of how do you engage with them in a way that doesn't come across as arrogant, and reaffirm their attitudes. Some of you remember at COP25, there was a big ACE event. It was like a 3-hour ACE event. And John Kerry came up and gave a big keynote talk about how wonderful education is and so forth. And he put in some digs about China. China isn't, capping their emissions and this and that. And then he left the room. And one of our colleagues from China got up and, was basically saying there's a lot going on in China. They brought a Chinese superstar from the soap operas to talk about what they're doing in China to try to raise awareness about climate action and literacy. But he was offended by John Kerry's statement. And, he basically made that same comment about how can you preach to us what to do when you don't really have your act together yourselves, and you are historically the biggest emitter in history. So it's a dilemma to me about how can we find ways of we being, the U.S. and North Americans, how can we, be humble, basically, and really not come across as having this attitude of being so smart. There's also a fear that 4 years from now, the Republicans take over and everything's out the window again. And so there's a lot of skepticism about liberal democracy, shall we say, in many parts of the world. So anyhow, I wonder if you all have any thoughts on that.
I have a lot of thoughts on that.
Start.
Yeah, I'm not surprised.
Yeah, I should out myself. I am an immigrant to the U.S. I'm Canadian born, but I'm dual citizen of Canada and U.S. And it's been and Frank and I have talked about this a lot, like what is the stance that we need to take? And I was just writing this morning with Tom about it, about the idea of we have got to break this idea that we're in a national competition. We have got to stop doing that, because this is a global crisis. And as such, we need to take a cooperative stance, and we need to think about what can we learn across boundaries with each other, accelerate, be excited when another nation does a wonderful thing, and amplify that and name that. And the US is very chaotic politically, swinging. And so really the effort often, and we're trying to struggle this right now about how the implementation should look, but in many ways, the effort may be better held in community ownership in a way that stabilizes the work of the community, even though it needs to be amplified and organized and funded through US, federal community partnership efforts. So the nature of how it actually is implemented in the US may be wildly different than what's ever been done before. We'll see as it starts to unfold. But I definitely would advocate more for that model, because that model is holding it with the people in communities that it's most impacting, and putting on government the responsibility to speak internationally for us and to fund and domestically for us and resource. And that, I think, is a little bit of a stronger international statement than what has been historically done. And I think, Kerry's team, as will Trudeau's team, because they're no angels in Canada either, with some of the Indigenous rights and pipeline issues we've had in Canada, we need to actually be humble in the stance of justice about what has and hasn't happened. But other nations have equal struggles that they may not have yet acknowledged, that they're, masking a little bit by how things are being presented to.
So one other point to build on what you're saying, Mark, is that we're a complicated country. We're a very complicated country. And in fact, we were designed to be a complicated country. Our formation was decentralized power. That's how we designed our country to avoid totalitarian, authoritarian rule. specifically in monarchy, but that's why and so this idea of federalism, of distributed power, it makes executing ACE incredibly challenging, but it also is the well that has so much richness in it. And so, as a federal civil servant leading this work for over a decade and a half, how you decentralize and build a shared agenda, who resources each piece. The national government in the United States plays a crucial role in resourcing and supporting in a way that no other entity strategically does. So its absence really hurts, but how you use its presence is crucial to the work, but it is not a federal plan that we're talking about. And as somebody who may be the national focal point for the United States, my posture is that this is a national plan, not a federal plan called national. And because the work is distributed, state governments, city governments, county governments, all levels of governments, tribal governments, plus all those entities across our country that play a crucial role in this work. It's a complicated thing. When you really get into the depth of what ACE brings, it has got to be very distributed, which means you have to have strong infrastructure for coordination and collaboration and listening and hearing. And I just want to say one other thing on this, is that I am learning tremendously from other countries' work on ACE and bringing that in. And if others want to learn from us, wonderful. If others want to share something with us and that really works for them, all ears, because we're serious about doing this work in this country. And, with great deal of humility, with our complicated history with international climate agreements, we come and we go. And that's just unfortunately the way our country works right now. Hopefully we'll stabilize things and will be an enduring source of progress. But ACE is actually the key to that happening. It's that important. So until we do that ACE work really robustly, it's going to be hard for us to stabilize what we do on climate going forward. It's that important.
Great, thank you.
Could I make a comment to both Frank, Mark, and Debs, or all Frank, Mark, and Debs? Speaking from a little experience, climate change education in Oregon, roughly 2009 to 2013, had a massive undertaking of having a portal of education resources around climate worldwide to look at what they were going on with that. And that's kind of like became overwhelming for us, so we haven't maintained that. But one of the things I learned from that is just how diverse and wonderful there is programs around the world. And we do need to recognize and absolutely learn from them. But it also stood out how it tends to be the United States that is way ahead in what it can do in terms of technology and communicating and networking. Now, if we are offering that as a resource to share with the world, not telling people what to do, but saying we have these resources, we have these abilities, does that begin to get the people who turn their chairs away and turn in and say, okay, you want to listen to us, you want to check with us, but everyone knows the United States has all this infrastructure for to things, and so it's offering along that line to help connect. Is that begin to turn the chairs around and say, we're not being cultural imperialists, but we want to share our resources with you and learn from you.
Yeah, I think, Jim, I would say yes or yes and. If, like, as we think about that, so for instance, what Laura was mentioning about the State Department contact working on climate change education in Latin America, like, that should be a co-designed effort too, right? Like the principles that we used in ACE around justice-centered, around distributed decision-making, around who's at the table and who has power to decide what is shared and how it's shared, and like, those types of things. It can't just be the people who have money, power, and infrastructure who are doing that. It has to be a collaborative effort on how it's done and if it's even wanted in spaces, because otherwise it is just a form of intellectual imperialism. And so we need to be really careful about how we do that in collaborations internationally. Otherwise, we're again just doubling down on the image of American arrogance.
And so it's wonderful that at that point, it's now noon Eastern time where I am. So technically we're at time, but I hope you all appreciate the humility, the seriousness, the depth, the collaboration by which we are taking the Doha work program, even though we're not under it. But I mean, the ACE framework, the original treaty, the Article 12 of the Paris Agreement, and trying to do our best on using these tools and these expectations and these commitments and these recommendations. And we wouldn't do it ultimately if it wasn't important, if it wasn't central to our work, and it turns out it is. So, but we do, this is an international call, even though I recognize most of the people here, but for those who are in the recordings, we are open to learning and collaborating and sharing and co-developing as much as possible, because that's the original spirit, but it was a brilliant thing that was added there. The original Article 6 of the treaty was a genius thing. Now we're really trying to run that genius and see how much power it has. And it turns out so far, it's pretty impressive. Anything?
Thank you, everybody.
Closing ideas?
And